Okay, I suppose we're live now. I drink some coffee. Let me also get some more docs. Can I get the chat for Stream.io? Very nice. I have a packed doc over here. Very cool. So we're about, what, 30 minutes? 30 minutes or about 14 minutes till? No, am I mathing right? 24 minutes till. Yeah. So we have some time to kill before we actually do this presentation. Yeah, so we're going to do some pixel art for a while, and then we're actually going to do the thing. I already did my little rehearsal for this. My little tiny baby rehearsal. So hopefully this is not crap, and hopefully it's just helpful to you guys. And I can at least point to it in the future next time people ask me questions about pixel art. To hopefully give some good information. I should probably add another slide. I keep thinking of more things to add to it. There's this whole idea of just continuously iterating like crazy. And not getting too hung up. That's a whole different talk. I think it's important. Whatever. We'll keep that out. This is more of a technical presentation. So I shall keep it as such. So, cool. I guess in the meantime, we'll do some pixel art until it's time to present, shall we? Does not sound like a bad deal at all. Does not sound like a bad deal at all to do some pixel art before we actually do the presentation. So, yeah. My audio's still very low from that game. That game creeped me out. That game really did creep me out. Okay, where is this guy? Here we go. Yeah, you might have to do some coding today after stream. I need to get this game done, dude. This game just needs to get done at some point. Let me also add something here. 1 second. Do I have general screen text? Oh, that's an image. So I can't write. It's just an image. Okay, well, I do have this text here. Let me change this. Lecture starting soon. And then outline to make it visible. To make it visible. Freaking nerd. Okay. Select color or make it white. Gonna make it white. Mr. White. Background opacity. That's not what I want. I want an outline. There we go. And I want it to be Barak. Here we go. There we go. And then now we just need a little bit, a better font, a nicer font. Deja vu. Kind of quirky. Got personality. Comic Sans? That sounds appropriate. I like me a Comic Sans. I like me a Comic Sans. Oh, can you only go up to 20? That kind of sucks. Whatever. Screw it, we'll just do a background. Okay. I shall wait till... That's 41. Let's just get some pixel stuff done. This be a little productive. Okay. Let's do the back side of him. Meow, meow, meow. Meow, 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 meow. Meow, meow, meow. It's kind of easy because the back side is going to be identical to the front side, typically. And we have to do a 3-6 or a 4-directional representation of him because in the world, characters are not going to always be facing the character like Doom. So, you know, if they're facing this way and the player moves from here to behind them, we have to actually show that side of the character. Like, especially in this case when the character is sitting down, like it's just going to be kind of immersion breaking. It's gonna be just kind of jank to just do that. So we're gonna actually do the thing. I have to make a little script for that, but that's gonna be quick. That's a very quick script. That's pretty easy. I don't like how the side profile doesn't quite match though. It's like up here. I almost feel like he has to have here. There too. Okay, that looks better. Oh, we should probably should make yeah, export them individually. As a PNG, as a panga. If I should make a name for these characters. World. I just need to make a better naming convention. One for the world. That means it's not a portrait; it's actual world sprite. And then it's just idle. I don't think he's gonna do anything else, but yes, export image sequence. Thank you. Let's go into here. Go into here. Let me get some water too while I'm at it. Fantastic. Fantastic. Also, I need to be reminded to not I need to be reminded to turn off that starting strewn thing. That's not going to be great to leave on during the presentation. Okay, now we have to choose a place for him to be. I think the biggest thing is the sun character. I think he's gonna be the one, because I think he's gonna be further over here somewhere. I'm not sure where we're gonna put him. So let me do some art. We have this guy. Let's now work on his other character. Meow, meow. Actually, we'll keep this. Move this over here. Do some illustration. We'll try to draw the sun having like similar rounded qualities to him. I think that will be quite good. Okay. He has to look younger. I'm giving that dumb nose too. That Kaku looking nose. Did I even do this right? We'll give him a receding hairline as well. Give him that Vegeta. Widow's Peak. This guy, little curls, long hair, long, beautiful, bountiful hair. Maybe give some volume and dimension to his nose, like it's like a pure side profile. What if you have like this be a more 3/4 perspective and you get to see some of the front of the nose? The big boobish nose. It'd be kind of funny because people might think like, oh, that's just the style of the game or whatever, and the characters, but it's like, no, this is a distinct thing. This is even weird for this people in this universe. Maybe maybe a side profile might be better because this just kind of shows how his nose just completely occludes his vision. Give him that Shrek treatment though. What time is it right now? 4:49. 10 more minutes still. It's kind of nice making characters that look a bit more wacky or weird. Different. I might have to play around with them a little bit more. Yeah, there you go. Just waiting for that to happen. It's annoying. I did a whole install a new ISO onto this camera that's supposed to bypass the dumb artificial 30 minutes limit. Goofy. Love it though. Let's keep iterating though. We have like 10 more minutes before we get into the nitty-gritty. Before we get into it. I still have to play around with this idea more. We'll do a side profile. Okay, and then we can have doing that. I gotta say, watching Pluton made me go, you know what? I don't know why we don't depict more characters with like receding hairline. Like this, theirs is a robot they constructed, whose whole thing, like, he's a robot. They could have made him look like whatever, and then They chose to have his hairline be like all the way up top here. And you know what? Like we all just accepted it. We're like, yeah, that's cool. Kizika's awesome, dude. Though I love that show because it really has characters with really different body types and proportions and whatnot. Yeah, I need to figure out what I'm gonna do with this hair though. I'm not sure if I want to keep doing that or switch something different. I don't know. How are we doing in terms of time? T minus 8 minutes. I should make an announcement on the Discord. Actually, maybe we can keep his hair very tight. I actually kind of like this. And him, I want to have a lot more expressions. So we're gonna have different portraits where he swaps out different expressions depending on what is said in a given moment. His eyes are gonna be the biggest question mark for me. With the old man, we kind of dive more into the details of the construction of his jaw and how skin interacts and all this kind of stuff. Get his Adam's apple in there. Okay. What's next? Yeah, I kind of want to make this character play guitar in the world so we can have like music in that specific area that kind of beckons the player towards him. And you can start that little mini quest log or quest, I guess. I don't know what this guy's gonna be wearing. I haven't thought about it too deeply. I want it to be in very stark contrast to his father, who's like, I mean, it's not really revolutionary, but he's for their thematic line, it makes sense for him to be very dressed up, suit and tie. And as for him, I kind of want to be in stark contrast to that. Less constrained attire, more flowy. Maybe just do a poncho, dude. Straight up, maybe just do the poncho. The man can rock a poncho. He looks kind of sick with a poncho. Yeah, buddy. Actually, I don't like this guy. Alright, 5 minutes till. I think I'll make an announcement. I think I'll make an announcement real quick. Starting at 5. Go down, dude. Burp, 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 burp. Burp, 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 burp. Okay. Let's do it. Let me write a message. Presentation. still 5 minutes? Say like, let's be safe, 2.5 minutes. Be weirdly specific about it. In fact, instead of typing out the URL explicitly, let's just copy and paste it. That sounds like a better idea, don't it? Okay, do that, and mirror. Discord. Let's copy the same message. Gorsh Goofy. Oh, Ricky. And I'm gonna turn off this ambient music. And do I still have the thing screenshotted? I don't. Whatever. Okay. And then finally. Two minutes. Man, I should have like not done this so impromptu and actually planned ahead. Maybe I could have actually shared this with people. These dang scam callers. Cool. 1 minute left. 1 minute left. And let me turn off this starting lecture soon thing. Locked in. Yep. Let me check this thing here. Okay. Oh, my bad. All right. It's 5 p.m. exactly. 5 p.m. exactly. Let me go to the tab. Where's the tab? Why do I have Mindstorm and JetBrains open here? Let's open up the actual presentation. And I also should probably record it. Dog, why do I have now when I actually need it? I can't find it. 1 second, let me get the presentation up. One moment. I'm trying to find the right tab, the right window. Obsidian Sounds. That, I think it's probably this one actually. Meow. Expand. Here we go. Presentation is up. I get a sip of water before we get into it. Shouldn't be too long. And then let me also reset the camera. It's probably going to go off in the middle of this, but you got to deal with it. I should probably actually start recording. All right, now we're recording. Let me also do the reset one more time. So this presentation is kind of an extension and a revamp of one I did a long time ago. Back in like 2020, I think, 2019, something like that. It covered quite a lot during that first presentation, but there's quite a few things that I wish to include with this one that I think are very prudent and important, not only towards pixel art, but also art in general. So I've revamped this to increase some readability, cite some sources, and go into some ideas a little deeper and provide some more resources. So yeah, I guess without further ado, let us get into this presentation, The Joy of Pixel Art, an Introduction, by yours truly, Marco Flores. So let's talk briefly about who I am. If you don't know, I am Marco Flores. I still technically go by Trixelbit online. I've been making games for like over a decade. Making games, not necessarily publishing them. And I've been doing pixel art for that duration of time as well. So I've done pixel art in a bunch of different capacities, from contract, commission basis, worked in a bunch of different games, both personal and with other people. Worked with Soulcade on their game, Hamster Havoc, which is coming out sometime soon. And and I have my own game studio called Cozy Cabin Games, and we're working on a game titled Messy Mansion currently. Currently I work as a programmer, and actually I do a lot of graphics programming, which has greatly shifted my perception and understanding of art, lighting, and rendering. So a lot of the way I approach these topics are going to be built within computer graphics as a baseline. So yeah, that's enough about me. And let's talk about what is pixel art. And to understand pixel art, we should probably talk about the thing in the title and the name, the building blocks of this medium. So a pixel is just a square that's within a raster grid, or within a grid of other pixels. A single pixel contains light information, it contains color, and when you have a bunch of them aligned together in an array, you have yourself a raster image. We say they're square, but even in older computers, there's actually an option to make pixels be square shaped, so 2x1. But that's the different topic for the time. For our purposes though, in the modern day, pixels are square and contain color. And everything you're seeing on your screen is pixels. It's composed of pixels. Everything on your monitor, on your phone, they are made of pixels. If you were to zoom in, you'll eventually see some pixels underneath it. However, when you look at this image here that is made of pixels, you don't say to yourself, this is pixel art. No, we don't really say that. And likewise, when you look at this picture, you immediately say, of course this is pixel art. How is this not pixel art? So where is that line? Where is the difference between just a regular raster image and actual pixel art? There's a quote I like to use to kind of help define that. And it is when the pixel holds importance to the nature of the work, which defines it as pixel art. So let's go through an example of it. This is Mario. You're aware of Mario. You're familiar with this image. And yet, if you look at all the pictures here, there's some weird variability with him. They look different. They're not all quite the Mario I've come to know. If you look at each of these images, they only have 2 or 3 pixels moved, changed, omitted. And yet that subtle change in pixels completely changes our perception of him significantly. He goes from having normal eyes to little small kind of dopey eyes, and having this hat that used to have a cap to now being more of a flat top. And instead of having this bodacious mustache, he kind of has this more clean-cut, reserved kind of Magnum PI, Omni-Man looking mustache. The point is, the pixels matter in this image. So let's talk about pixel art as an art movement. So pixel art arose out of necessity. It arose as a solution to limited hardware, limited memory, limited processing. So it was an art form that was born from the constraints of hardware. So for example, when we look at the Nintendo Entertainment System, its full color palette it had was 56 unique colors. And even then, it could only show 25 of those colors, less than half of them, on a screen at any given point. And even then, the individual sprites could only show 3 unique colors on them. So a lot of restriction that forced artists to get creative and push boundaries in different ways. However, we're no longer in the 80s anymore. We are in the modern age, where we have bigger processors, GPUs, ray tracing, all that fancy stuff. Pixel art in the modern context isn't a necessity. It is a choice. So, the way of pixel today, the driving force of creativity within pixel art is limitations. Limitations are self-imposed, and they're consciously chosen by the artist. So oftentimes they choose to restrict their color palette, the number of colors they have. They choose lower resolutions and the image size, and they use those constraints to inform their art. But there's another element that pixel artists have to contend with that other artists don't usually have to wrestle with, and that is the flux, the wrestling between the intention of the artist and what the viewer perceives. So in this example, we have an artist who intends to communicate an apple. So they render that apple into a sprite, and then the viewer looks at that sprite and they say, hey, that's an apple. In this case, there's a one-to-one parity between the intention of the artist and the perception of the viewer. However, that's not always the case. Here, we have another example from a sprite from SNES game from Link to the Past. Here, the artist clearly intended one thing here, a guy in a robe with this gem on it, and then he creates a sprite, but something funky happens. The viewer looks at it, and they see a character from Kids Next Door. So in this case, there's not one-to-one parity between the intention and the perception that happens. There's ambiguity in the rendering of the sprite that allows reinterpretation of this art to be different than what it was intended. And as your resolution goes smaller and smaller, the bigger and wider the array of possibilities for the viewer are. So pixel art is this weird, interesting thing where the viewer participates in the creative process of the art. So cool, that's enough about the philosophy of pixel art and some of the high-level concepts. Let's get more pragmatic. Let's talk about the tools, techniques, and concepts involved within it. So one important thing is line work. So pixel art is greatly informed by the medium, and lines are no different. There are certain angles that work better with the medium, and there's other angles that just don't quite translate very well. So if your intention is to create a straight line, oftentimes you want to stick within the 90, 45, or 26.9 degree angles. Angles with even pixel segments. So you can see an example of lines that are considered jagged or jaggies that look very weird and noisy, and when you zoom out they look less like a straight line and more like this weird wobbly mess. Whereas if you conform to these angles, you have a line that seems very straight to the viewer, and that becomes more apparent as you zoom it out. So here's an example of an artist who actually uses just these angles to produce most of their art, or at least their personal art. And you can see how all the edges seem very straight. So it's a very distinct style, and it shows how much is possible just by using these straight lines. But sometimes you want to communicate a form that's organic, that has a lot of curvature to it. Well, you can still do curves in pixel art, but there's still some certain rules you kind of want to abide by to make it feel smooth and not too jaggy. So in this case, you see this translates, in this case it translates to even increments, or regular kind of increments. So you have a curve, and a curve has an apex to it, which is kind of the point of symmetry for it. And if you look in this example, it's a bit odd. First we start with 1 pixel, and then the next segment has 2 pixels, and then the next one is 1 pixel, and then 2, and then 7. It's kind of all over the place. Whereas if you look at this good example, or at least a more normative example, the increment happens gradually and regularly, where you start with 1, and then 2 segments, and eventually 7. And you can play around with these increments to get the shape that you desire. So over here I have an example where You could change the increment from being very slanted and low in terms of slope to other ones that are very tight and immediate. So there's still quite a lot of flexibility when it comes to communicating curvature. So here we have a couple of examples of curvature within pixel art. One from Street Fighter Third Strike, a really great example with a lot of curves over him. One from the Pixel Joint forums, and another one from one of the pieces I've worked on for my game. All use curvature, and it looks pretty decent. But sometimes you can't even conform to that. Sometimes you have a line that's just fundamentally weird and wild and jaggy. So another tool in your disposal is anti-aliasing, using subsequently smaller, lower transparency pixels to smooth out the transition between angles. So here you have an example here that's aliased, where it's just raw, no smoothing whatsoever. And when you zoom out, it looks very jittery. Whereas the one on the right has anti-aliasing applied to it, and subsequently the smaller version looks very clear. So yeah, very great tool to have in your toolbox. And it can be used not only for outlines, but also from transitions from one color group to the other color group. So you see that applied here with GenPixel and Mowling, where you have color groups and you have anti-aliasing the transition between them. And likewise, you have straight lines that are smoothed out by anti-aliasing. So really great examples of executing that. And likewise, your outline doesn't have to be a solid black color. You can actually make these outlines colored in different ways. So here you have the outlines over here being brighter to represent the surfaces that are being hit by the sunlight or whatever light source they have. And likewise, you have the backside, which is occluded by shadow, having darker colors for the outline. So really cool execution of that. So beyond lines, we have colors and palettes. And color is a very wonky thing to kind of quantify because it's kind of a mixture of physical phenomenons that exist independent of us, but also is tied to biological factors and how we perceive things. For our purposes, though, we're going to be using hue, saturation, and value to kind of quantify the components of light sources. So in this case, hue is the identity of the color, red, green, and blue. If you want to have a physics-based definition of it, it's the principal wavelength of that color. So you can see the wavelength of the visible spectrum for humans, and you see how it goes from violet to red. That is hue. Saturation is how present that color is, or how much that principal wavelength is visible. So a color that's very saturated is going to look very much like one of these colors here, and a color that's desaturated is going to look very much gray, either gray, white, or black. And in value, you can think about as just how dark the color is, how much black is added into the mix of the color. So these are wordy descriptions of these things, but I think visually it's more intuitive to parse out what these things mean, where you have this grid of all the hue, and you see how saturation goes down and approaches gray, and you see how value starts with blue color, but then the lower down the value goes, the more black is added onto it. It just explains how these components interact with each other. So the reason we bring up this idea of these components for color is that they're very important in choosing your shades. So something a lot of introduction or new pixel artists do is they find the color they want to use, and then they need shadows and darker versions of it. So all they do is bring down the value, and that's it. And that's what I did here in this piece on the left. I just took the color, and each color group I just lowered the value. But if you look at compared to the right one, you'll find that it doesn't really pop as much. It doesn't have that much pop to it. What is the difference between this guy and this guy? Well, the fundamental difference is that this one not only decreases value for each color, but we also shift the hue from the principal color of green to orange to red. And that adds color information and creates even more contrast between each color group. And if you want to add even more contrast, you can even move saturation. So you can do a variety of different things with that by manipulating those components. Here I shifted it towards red to make a warmer feel, but you can shift it to blue to have a cooler feel, or shift it to a bunch of different colors. You have a bunch of options at your disposal. But by manipulating those three components, you add way more contrast and nuance to your piece. So color count and color restricted palettes. a lot of people like to use restricted palettes for their art. There's a bunch of preset ones that come with Aseprite, and there's a bunch of different reasons, either to give your piece a unique feel, or maybe you're trying to model the restrictions of a specific piece of hardware. I know for Shovel Knight, they did that, where they used the NES palette for the most part to inform all their art. So color counts and restricted palettes are very helpful. So here's two pieces that use restricted color palettes. One from me I did for a value study, and another one from Orange Art, which uses the Game Boy color palette, 4 colors I believe, to model the actual restrictions of the Game Boy. So yeah, restricted color palettes are very helpful for achieving different types of effects. But there's times when you're using a restricted color palette where you have color A and you have color B, and you need a color between those two, but you don't have that available to you due to the palette. Well, one technique that people use is dithering. Interleaving those two colors to create the illusion that there's a third color in between them. And here you have a simple example of this gradation from one color to this black color and how it makes the illusion of a gradient. And dithering doesn't have to be a uniform thing. You can use a variety of noise and shapes to add texture to it, like we see here. So 2 really great pieces of art that showcase dithering to great effect. There's one from Jim Pixel, and he uses dithering as a transition between color groups. From zoomed out, you can't really see it, but when you zoom in, you start seeing these dither patterns that help add nuance, contours, and shape, and transitions between these value groups. And likewise, Metal Slug uses it all the time for their lighting. If you look in the shadows, or if you look at the highlights in the water of the lamps, you'll see a bunch of dithering being used there. In fact, Metal Slug uses dithering for a bunch of different things, especially texturing as well. So great examples of that usage. So that kind of concludes some of the basic techniques that are used across all of pixel art. This is going to be a more generalized concept that applies to all forms of art, really, which is how you render surfaces. Let me get some water real quick, one moment. So, rendering surfaces. For this example, we're going to be using a Phong lighting model to kind of describe these different components of lighting. Because at some point, what you're depicting may very well be existing in a world in your imagination that has a light source and has all these different behaviors. So Phong lighting is kind of composing 3 elements into one final thing that communicates lighting. We have ambient, we have diffuse, we have specular, and all of them combined create this shape that's lit and feels like it's embedded in a world. So let's talk about each of these individual components. So let's talk about diffuse lighting. So in your art, you're likely going to have a subject that's in it and a light source. And that light source is going to emit photons, and photons have different behaviors. Sometimes photons hit an object and just kind of die there. Sometimes they hit an object and bounce around. So for diffuse lighting, we're focusing on the photons that come from a light source and hit the object for the first time. So here we have an example of it. We have a sphere, and we define that a light source is coming from the top right, and it's coming down to hit that sphere. And everything that's directly hit by this light source is white, and everything else that's in the shadow is blue. So that not only applies for the sphere, it also applies for this character we have here. So everything in white is what's directly hit by lighting, the light source. So everything that's in white is considered the diffuse lighting. It usually reveals the base color of whatever object or material you're indicating here. So in this case, we have this darker color here, and it reveals, once it gets hit by the light, this brighter color of her skin tone. So that is kind of the gist of diffuse lighting. It's the first initial bounce from your light source. Now we have ambient lighting, the second component. Your shadows in real life, and even in your art, are not going to always be just pure black. When we talked about photons bouncing around, we talked about the photons hitting you, the subject. But some photons, even right now, are missing me and hitting the floor. And when they hit the floor, they bounce back and hit my face in the shadow. And that's why the shadows I have here, even right here, are not pure black, but instead are a little bit bright, and they're informed by the color of your environment. And that's exactly what we do here. So these images are exactly the same. The shadow groups is exactly the same. I'm only changing the color that's being used here. In this Minecraft world, the world is largely just green grass. So when the sun hits and misses the subject and hits the grass and bounces back, it's going to be green. And likewise, in this netherworld, some of the light's missing your subject and hitting something that's red and bouncing back, and it's going to be red. So ambient lighting is kind of the summation of all the light sources, or all the indirect lighting that's happening from your environment. Now, in this purpose, in this case, we're only using one color to describe that, but you can use multiple colors if you have a bunch of different unique things in your background that need to reflect different colors onto the subject. Even game engines use your skybox to inform their ambient color lighting. So that is the second component of Phong lighting. And then the final one is specular, and which is describing how reflective is your material. So here we have this basic materials from Unity, where you have this very rough material with a smoothness of 0, and you don't really see much of the light source being reflected. And then as it goes up, you see more of that light source be present, and eventually you have a very clear reflection of that light source. This is what specularity really is. And if you look at more examples of this, you see how different objects have different levels of specularity on it. In this case, the cyberpunk rendering, there's an object here that has a pretty low specularity, but it still reflects quite a bit of it. But then you see a part of it that has a higher specularity, so more of the light source gets reflected. In the case of specularity, there's a little difference between diffuse. Specularity usually reflects and shows the color of your light source far more. Your light source has a lot more impact on the final color of your specular compared to diffuse lighting. So Marco, this is all really cool, but this is very computer graphics-y stuff, right? How does this translate to pixel art? Well, it very much translates to pixel art, because in pixel art, and any art in general, you're making conscious decisions about the materials you're trying to communicate to your viewer, and you're trying to convince them of those properties. So if you're drawing something that has a high smoothness, like metal or glass, then you want to use properties and shade it in a way that reflects that. Whereas if you're describing materials that are rougher, like fabric, that don't really reflect, then there's different types of behaviors you're going to be doing to do that. So in this example I cooked up here, you see those same Unity balls, but translated into pixel art. And you see how we go up in smoothness, more of that bright color group becomes reflected and shown. And as you go up in specularity, you start having greater contrast within your color value groups, and typically even reflect more of your environment around you. So this is a simple application of it, but you see it applied in a bunch of different places. So we have these 3 examples kind of showcasing 3 different places of application of those 3 components we described. So here we have Danny Oliver's art. And you see how there's different materials on here that have different specularity properties, where you have the beaks and the claws that have a very high smoothness to them. And then you have things that are a bit rougher, like the fabric and its feathers and the accordion, that don't quite have the same amount of specularity. A conscious decision made by the artist. Likewise, we have this art from Mitch Spitch, which indicates or shows the choice of the ambient color used for the shadows. Here, the shadows aren't just black. They're actually changed and manipulated and informed by the environment a little bit. And by doing that, you have something that feels a bit more nuanced and more baked into the world you're communicating. And then my art here is just kind of showing some of these properties in application in lower resolution pixel art. Even something very small like a 64 by 64 or 32 by 32 bit pixel sprite can still use these elements to great effect or pretty good effect. So this is kind of the conclusion of this material rendering side of this presentation. Now I'll start getting into the real stuff: texturing, 3D, how to UV map pixels perfectly, how to integrate Aseprite into Blender and Blender into Aseprite, and how to do triplanar material mapping. And that's a lot. 3D and application of pixel art to 3D is a lot of content, too much for this lecture we have here. That would require its own thing. But if there's demand for that, I would gladly like to make another lecture set that dives more into applying 3D pixel art into a rendering pipeline and that sort of thing. But I'm not going to leave you hanging. There is some resources I provided here. So in the Discord, I'm going to provide a link to this slide deck if you want to reference some of this stuff. A bunch of great resources I found to be very helpful in making games that are pixel art styled but also 3D. stuff like pixel 3D modeling in Blender and Aseprite, how to do seamless textures, both using Aseprite, and if you're not using Aseprite, how to use them in achieve the same seamless texture effect in other software. Normal generation, normal inspectors, triplanar shading papers, how to implement that if you want to. So yeah, that pretty much concludes the bulk of this presentation. I hope you guys found it useful, found it of some kind of utility. If you want to support the stuff we're doing, follow me on Cozy Cabin Games, both on the website. We have all the links there. And if you want to see some of my personal art, there's Trixelbit. I recorded this, so I'm probably going to upload it to YouTube in case any of you guys want to see this lecture from start to beginning. I noticed some people came in at the end. Very sorry. But yeah, that kind of concludes the whole breadth of this little pixel art lecture. So, I guess, is there any questions here? Any comments, questions, or concerns? How long did this take, actually? It was about 51 minutes. Jeez, that took longer than I expected. It felt like 5 minutes. But yeah. Well, if there's no comments, questions, or concerns, I suppose we can conclude this here. I'll link this presentation into the Discord in case any of you guys want to see access this PowerPoint slide. And yeah, this actually did pretty good for time. 1 second. I'll post this in resources or announce it. Hey y'all, here is the pixel art lecture slide deck. I almost feel tempted to go through it again for the guys, for y'all who missed it. That really depends on whether or not y'all want that. It'll be good practice for your utility. But yeah, yeah, there's a lot of people who've been asking or popping in the streams asking about this stuff, and I feel like I kind of reiterate on a lot of the same points, especially like the hue shifting stuff. That's come up a bunch. This material lighting fong stuff though is very new, but I think is very important because I think there's a lot of what we're trying to communicate is usually physically based, but a lot of times we don't think about it in terms of material or even rendering or any of that kind of stuff. Which kind of sucks because even in low resolution pixel art, you see these kind of things manifest and be used. And even if you're not drawing them explicitly, even in a game like Messy Mansion, you see some of these properties being used. Whatchamacallit. But yeah. So if there's no comments, questions, and or concerns, I guess I'm just going to switch to doing some game deving for a little bit, if y'all don't mind. And if there's any questions about the slides, I'll be totally willing to go through them again. Yeah, so let's look at this here. So yeah, still quite a lot of applications when it comes to this kind of stuff. Don't need to change the angle for this light source. Or not light source, but whatever. All right, let me take a quick break to use the bathroom. I drink quite a lot of water before this because I knew I was gonna be yapping for a while, and I'll probably continue working on game dev. All right, be right back, guys. Be right back. Do I have a thing for BRB? Yeah, here we go. All right, I'm back. I'm kind of debating if I should go through it again. I don't know. I'm surprised the camera lasted this long. 1 second. No, that's my dumb face. Here we go. A more normal thing. I don't know, but I also kind of want to be productive too. I don't know. If someone wants to see it, then I'll do it. But if not, it's alright. Alright, so let's talk about the agenda for today for Messy Mansion, which I'm probably going to change to Stain World. I think I want to finish. There's 2 kind of orders of tasks. Start your lecture, but I can catch the re-upload and ask questions later. All right, sweet. Yeah, I'm also streaming this on YouTube. If I can find it. So I think the lecture might still be actually just available there right now, if I'm not mistaken. If not, I could just go through and just polish it up. Live. Am I live? Yeah, it's showing I'm live. Excuse me. I'm a little bit of a pig. Yeah, and the slide decks are in the Discord as well. And if there's anything else I should add to this, because I've only really covered some basic stuff, like basics of lighting, techniques for pixel art and all that kind of stuff. But there's more things to go into. Like, we haven't talked about animation at all. Animation's a pretty important thing that's worth covering as well. And a lot of these stuff is just about is only relevant to like kind of static assets. But animation is equally as important, and it's used for a bunch of different things. There's some good resources already for people interested in doing animation, because a lot of just the fundamentals of animation are not pixel specific. At most, there's some stuff related to subpixel movement that is relevant. That's medium specific to pixel art. But it doesn't require a whole presentation to talk about it. And some of it's kind of informed by like intuition as you go, the more you work with it. So if I were to do an addition, it'd probably be that. This thing though, 3D is going to be a whole different ball game. I mean, we kind of covered a lot of the 3D components here in material lighting. Yeah, so I think it'll be much more targeted towards like hardware specific limitations, graphics, that sort of thing. I kind of want to do a presentation one day on shaders, because I think shaders are not that hard at all. They're really not that crazy. It's just that a lot of times it's not really explained super intuitively. And you can explain some stuff about shaders in a very high level way that's very independent of a shader language. Because like there's just general techniques you can do that are pretty cool. Heck, even explaining how lighting works would not be that crazy, and just basic ideas like what is a dot product? What is a dot product, and how do you use that to create the illusion of lighting? How would you even go about implementing it? It's not that crazy. It takes like 5 minutes, really. At least to conceptually understand the steps of it. Implementing your own light thing is way different. Like for Messy Mansion, this game is using its own entire light system. Like there's no Unity lighting component in here. This is all my own stuff. And to get the basics of it working was like a day or two. But fine-tuning a lot of this behavior took way longer. But yeah, all this you're seeing is not done with Unity lighting components or any of that kind of stuff, or Unity shaders, surface shaders and whatnot. It's all hand-rolled. And I think a lot of people are kind of scared about lighting, or scared to know too much about what goes into rendering. But I think it's not that crazy. I used to think it was too crazy for me, but it turns out a lot of it just uses super simple stuff. So I'm not sure. All right, you know what? I'm going to do a poll. I'll do a poll. And We're gonna do 2 polls. One poll about the next topic I should cover, and then another poll on whether or not I should redo, or I should go through this lecture one more time on stream. Let's do that. So much yapping. I love yapping, man. I'm a great yapper. I think maybe I'm not a great yapper, but I enjoy yapping. That I can't say. So we're gonna make a little poll. If not, no worries. This will be re-uploaded. Paid, manage goals. I don't even know how to use this, do I? I'm kind of a boomer, aren't I? Where is it? I'm gonna make a poll. One second. Dude, I'm actually a streamer boomer. I don't know how to interact with this interface at all. One second. Give me one moment, guys. Stream, add markers, clip that. Okay, I guess I'm just too much of a boomer to actually figure out how to start a poll. So we're gonna do this. We're just gonna use numerics here. So I guess press 1. This feels weird. All right, I guess we're gonna do this. Press 1 if you want me to either to go through the lecture one more time, or 2 if you want me to just continue doing game deving and stream and just continue working on game deving for Messy Mansion. It's one or the other. I have like 1 more hour available. Can I not? Dude, I know they have polls here. Manage goals, rate channel. Dude, I'm actually a glue sniffer. I'm actually sniffing glue because I'm so dumb. Dude. Whatever, screw it. I'll run through it again. Screw it. I feel like I do like doing it. I want to see if I can kind of polish this up a little bit more so that I just have this on hand, and then hopefully like maybe Indie City Games or something I can do it for that. I don't know. We'll see. Or actually, you know what? I'll just do another day. I'll do this another day when there's more people, when I have more time to actually say, hey guys, we're doing this thing. Yeah, we'll just do that. Yeah, because today was way too last minute and I feel bad about that. Okay, so beyond that, I'm kind of interested in gauging interest for a potentially new slide. So should I get into... Let's do this. I'm going to make a couple options here. So 1 for shaders, 2 for... We're going to do this. 1 for shaders. Maybe I should do this in the Discord. I don't know. I'm just interested. Would there be interested in doing a graphics / shaders presentation one day? Or 3D applications of pixel art? I guess those are the 2 main things that are of interest. And I guess the third one is animation. So of those 3, which ones you guys would prefer to me to dive into at some point? Graphics, shaders, 3D applications, and animations in pixel art. I was figuring out how to do a server. I was struggling with serving my the WebGL build. Because I'm a jabroni. Of course, I was looking at Bonsai Buddy. All right. Anyways, stuff to work on for today. Let me actually hear this because I have this dumb little effect that's happening here in game. Just to test out, because there needs to be some physical feedback when you're cleaning stuff, but I don't like the sound. I want cleaning this to feel satisfying, and this feels a little weird. But at least mechanically, like this, the code is there. It's just a matter of getting the right asset for that. It's just a matter of doing that. So anyways, bigger stuff we have to do. We talked about last stream about doing a system where we have barriers, and only when a certain area is cleaned up to a certain degree does that barrier go down. So for example, we might have like a wall here to introduce this concept to the player, and only when like this chunk of dirt is cleaned up does this wall go down or become not a collider for the player. So that's one code specific thing we need to do mechanically. There's another thing that's less important, but I think kind of fun to work with, which is some more shader stuff. Specifically, reworking these hazards, because they were done early during the game's development, and now we have a very different visual effect going on for this dirt fragment stuff compared to what this is doing. So I think there is a need to explore doing a different implementation of this. However, there's some weird, wacky things that we're probably gonna have to wrestle with, because I don't like having these guys be just squares. Maybe I'm just kind of a perfectionist. How's the state of the dirt stored if it's not too much of a tangent to ask about? I'd love to talk about it. So the state of the texture is stored within of this dirt is actually stored to a texture. So for this whole map, and by the way, when I'm streaming, I'm very open to talk about all the implementation details of this stuff. Yeah, I'm totally down to do tangents. So there's one texture that contains all this dirt information. And in fact, we can go here. I can open this up, and here we go. Here's the dirt map. And this is projected onto all the materials here. Well, how do you do that, Marco? Sure, you have this texture where white indicates dirty and black indicates clean. Kind of backwards, but whatever. How does that translate to all these elements either being lit by this or not having this dirt applied to it? It's a very simple idea. Simple idea in a high level. Implementation's a little bit more involved. So it depends. I wonder how familiar you are with the idea of UVs and texture samplers. You might be used to the idea that let's go to Blender. Let's go to Blender, because I think it better exemplifies this idea pretty well. And we might have to talk a bit about shading pipelines in general. Not that crazy. It's very simple in principle, but it's good for it's good for us to be on the same page here. We're gonna do texture. What are we doing here? You're gonna be a UV editor. So we have this text. We have this material here. Let me add an image to this as well. And we'll go through this little explanation. Open picture. Let's go to pictures. What do I have here? What do I have here in terms of textures? Who do I have here? John. Okay, my boy John. All right, so we have this texture here. Cool. Switch to this. One moment. Then we're gonna add a material. We're gonna set the base color to be an image, texture, and then we're gonna select John as this guy, sweet. And cool, now this this cube has a texture applied to it. Cool. Let's go to edit mode. And you're gonna see, and this is nothing too new. I feel like quite a few people already use this idea. So you have this 3D geometry, and we have to have a way to kind of indicate, hey, what part of this image should be shown here, right? So you unwrap this into this coordinate space where it starts from 0, 0, and then this corner over here is 1, 1 on the X. So you move up here, and the X coordinate over here is 1, 0, so on and so forth, right? It's a normalized space for this texture. So when you select this face, you're gonna see that it's occupying certain values here. And that's how it indicates what should be sampled. So in this case, like if I were to move this, let's make this simpler. If I were to move this over here and let's scale it a little bit, we can pretend that this coordinate here is like 0, 0, and this is 0.5 by 0.5. So cool. Why are we going through all this explanation here? Well, every single material you see rendered on your screen is a product of a shader. And a shader does a thing where it takes these triangles and kind of indicates, hey, what coordinates on this image do we need to use to sample this color? So usually they're aligned to something called object space, where if I were to, no matter how I rotate or manipulate this object, the coordinate is not going to move around. It's not going to be weird, right? It's going to stay exactly the way you intend it to be. That's the typical behavior of all objects. And usually when you export a 3D model, not only is the mesh information here exported out, but also the UV coordinates as well. So each vertex contains the UV information. In this case, this top face would have the UV coordinates. If I were to look at it here, this vertex not only has its position of the vertex, but also the UV coordinate of 0, 0. And then this one would be 0.5 by 0. And then this one up here is going to be 0.5 by 0.5, etc., right? All that information is baked into it. Now we're going to go into Messy Mansion for a second, and you're going to see something weird. I'm going to move objects around, and they're not going to behave the way you'd expect them to. So if I were to move this sphere around, or the cylinder, you're going to notice that the texture is kind of scrolling around. It's moving. Well, that's a bit weird. Why is that? And likewise, if I move this guy and move it into this, not only does the texture move, but it kind of blends in with this. Like if I were to make this very low in terms of angle, you notice that they kind of feel seamless. So what is going on here? So the way we do UV projection is not based on baked-in UVs. Like usually, like we talked about here, you export a 3D model that has not only the vertex position, but also the UV position. We're not using that at all. Instead, the UV coordinates for all of our materials here are using the world space position. So what do I mean by world space position? Well, let me make a game object and let's go to origin. Every every space has an origin point for their coordinate system, whether you're in GameMaker, Unity, whatever. There's a point where there's the position is 0, 0, 0 across the board. And this is the origin. And as I move this along, you're going to see that the position continues to change. And this is being changed in meters. So this represents, we're 25 meters forward and 30 meters forward and whatever. So, okay, that's one piece of the puzzle. How does this all combine together? Well, let's talk a little bit about shaders. Let's return back to the idea of shaders. And nothing specific about shaders. We're going to talk very high level. We're going to go to Miro. We're going to go into blank thing. So we have this triangle. It's aligned to world space. I know this feels like a tangent. Hold on with me. I may not have planned this properly because, you know, this is impromptu, but just hold on. We're getting to your initial question of how does this texture work, or how does this projection work? So we have this idea of this UV coordinate that we're using to sample your texture. And when it's baked into it, you can transform this triangle. It's not going to change the UV coordinates. So if I say, again, going back to here, the UV coordinate is 0, 0, and then the UV coordinate here is 0.5. And then this UV coordinate over here is actually, I don't know, 0.5. This is all relative to the coordinate of the object. So if you rotate this in the world, it's not going to change the coordinates whatsoever. Now, the way we do materials, and we do this, we're using the world position, meaning that we have an origin point in the world that we're referencing. So in this case, there's an x-axis, and then we have our y-axis here. And this point is 0, 0, 0. And then as you go up these axes, they're going to increment in different values. This is 0, 1. And this is going to be 1, 0. And they're going to keep continuing like that forever up this number line. There's another tangent question, but is the world texture with some sort of triplanar mapping type? It's triplanar texture mapping. That's exactly what we're doing, is triplanar texture mapping. We're using the world coordinates to define the UV coordinates here. So in this case, this might likely be like, I don't know, 1.0, 1, 0, whatever. And up here, it's going to be like something else. And if you change, in fact, let's just look at this one coordinate where, let's say we're saying it's taking place at 1, 0. Well, if I move this forward or move this over here, this is technically 1, 0. But if I move this up, the UV coordinate's going to change, and that's going to cause the texture to scroll. So that's kind of one property of triplanar material mapping, is it allows for this dynamically kind of changing UV mapping of your textures. So anyways, what does this got to do with anything? Well, let's take inventory of what we talked about. We have this general texture that indicates what part of the world is dirty and which part of the world is clean. And it's actually mapped directly to the world itself. So if you look here, we have this red cube that's encompassing everything. This texture perfectly aligns with this red cube area. And each pixel represents a cubic meter in this world. So in our material sampling, we can actually take the current world space position of said pixel or said fragment and use that to sample whether or not this particular area, cubic meter, is hit by this miasma or if it's not. And if it is, we can then choose to actually composite our little miasma effect on top of the base albedo of the texture and not just this have the texture alone. So if we look at the actual code here, seems very scary. Don't worry, guys. It's not that crazy. It's not too scary. It boils down to this 2 lines of code. We have this one called lit color, which is the albedo mixed with the shadows and highlights and whatever. And then we have this miasma post. Oh, one second. That's not too much relevant. That's kind of relevant. And we have the miasma color, right? And then we can either opt it in to receive it or not. Please undo. I have caps lock. Let me actually look at this a little bit closer. See if I find the correct line here. The color base. Here we go. Here's what determines if whether or not it's lit by miasma. So we have this color base. We have the final color we want to add to the miasma. And then we have the alpha channel, or, you know, whatever, a color texture. And that indicates whether or not this should be included with the color. And then we lerp between those values. And that determines how we composite the two things together. I'm sorry if I clicked the audio. That's all that really goes on there. In fact, if you want to take a closer look here and make this a bit more simplified, in fact, let me use an even simpler shader here, because we have this terrain material shader that is being used to do this effect. And I think here it's a bit more simpler in its application. Yeah. So yeah, we have the miasma mix. By the way, I'm calling the dirt stuff miasma. All this purple stuff you're seeing here, that's what I'm describing. But if you want to, let's actually take a look. Let's strip out some of this stuff here. So we're gonna what are we gonna do? We're gonna return. Let's return this. And what do we get? Cool. Cool. So you see an inversion of the map we described earlier. Anyways, this is kind of long-winded, but I think hopefully this helps describe the thing what I'm trying to describe here. All these materials have this hook in to sample this texture. Oh, man, I'm trying to avoid having to talk about what vertex shaders are and what fragment shaders are, and that way you can see where the values are coming from, but I'm also don't want to dive too into nitty-gritty. Or at least if I'm going to dive into the nitty-gritty, I want to have more things prepared for you guys. But yeah, they're using the XY coordinate in world space to do that, which is why you have things like here where you see, it's weird that this pattern we see here of dirt is the same up here as it is down there. Why is that? Oh, because we're only using the XY coordinates or the XZ coordinates to indicate whether or not this area is dirty or not. There's no concept of Z. So no matter how high up an object is, it's still going to be affected by this. Yes, so if you clean the dirt on the bottom, it'll clean the top. In fact, let's play the game real quick. Let's play the game a little bit, and you're going to see that happen. So you're going to have the game over here, and you're going to have this world view of this environment. We're going to go approach where the ceiling is here, and we're going to start cleaning it up. And you see, look at that. You see that? The top is getting cleaned as well. Look at that. Now there's ways to correct that and to deal with it. Some more intensive than others. At this scale, you don't want to use a 3D texture because it's just so much information to encode. Especially at this scale, it's like what, 1024 by 1024 pixels just for this guy. Imagine that cubed. That's a lot of data. But you can do something very simple where you just have another dirt texture map and you only have these guys sample textures that are above a certain Y coordinate. And you'll achieve that same effect there. There's other workarounds to achieve that similar effect, but it's usually going to result in just having a separate texture. And a lot of this technique that we're doing isn't really new or crazy. You see this stuff in like Mario Sunshine or Splatoon or whatnot. As much resolution as Z-axis to resolve a lot of the conflicts, I would think at least. No, you would not need that much. Like if you're gonna do this, you would probably have it be non-uniformed, where the X and Y or the X and Z coordinates are in meters, whereas the Z or the Y axis can be like 10 meters or something, or 50 meters. That's if you want to do that. I don't want to do that because it's very easy for me to paint texture maps directly on here. You can use multiple pictures and then combine them into a 3D texture, but it's a lot. It's not too much. I don't know. It's not as beneficial for me. But yeah, that's fundamentally how this texture map stuff works. This dirt mechanic works. We can paint that, save it, go here. There's some jank, but that's okay. What is a game without a little jank? And then I can load in this texture map. And let's see if I can find that smiley face on the map somewhere. Unless I drew it. What did I draw it? Here we go. Unless it's underneath a bunch of stuff here. Yeah, it's a pretty simple like implementation. Like if you assume the level is gonna be just flat, you can do that. If you want to have a level that's not flat, there's other ways to kind of avoid that issue. So one issue I'm having, like for example, there's this bridge here that the player has to, I want the player to have to come up here to clean, but I don't want them to clean it down here ahead of time, or else there's gonna be nothing for them to clean there. How do you solve that? Well, just keep the player from walking on that ground. So you could just have like, you can place a hazard here directly that the player has to avoid and not touch the ground in order to activate. Scale this out, move it here, and then voila, all of a sudden we have this kind of illusion of consistency across depth by forcing the player to not tread that same ground. It's kind of a hacky solution, but at the same time, it's still effective. Because then once the player treads up here, they're like, oh, there's this whole area that's uncleaned and I need to clean it. Very simple, but effective. And honestly, a lot of game dev solutions are just that, right? Simple, kind of quirky solutions, but they get the job done right? But yeah, so that's kind of a look at how this miasma system works or how this dirt map system works. And a lot of times it just boils down to kind of triplanar techniques. Something I'm looking at for this guy though is because I want this to not be like a block, like a square cube of death. It will be very cool for this to feel like more fluid, the same way these guys kind of feel fluid. So there's a whole school of algorithms that are kind of centered around the idea of having blobs that can interact and form and fuse together. There's another thing called like metaballs, for example, which honestly, this dirt mechanic is kind of a 2D representation of that, of metaballs kind of, where you have this fluidity where if two things get too close together, they coalesce, kind of like liquid. There's a good paper I saw. Metaballs, algorithms. The only thing is that this is a 2D kind of implementation of that, whereas for these blocks, it would be a 3D type implementation. So I'm not sure. This is the part where I'm like at the frontier, at least as far as my knowledge is concerned. Yeah, marching squares. But it's going to be very cool to have something that kind of behaves like that. The only thing is that this would likely require dynamic mesh generation to have it affect kind of like that. Or maybe we can keep it simple like 2D, or we have this same idea, but instead of having it just be projected onto a flat surface, we actually use that to inform geometry. And we just define like what area it is. That way we can have like bubbly looking effects like this, yeah. Yeah. Something like that. So that these things feel less fixed and blocky and instead feel more fluid, dynamic, weird, odd. And honestly, we can do it in a way that's not too computationally intensive. Keep in mind, one big thing we have to wrestle with is that this game is being built for WebGL. So in the Discord, we actually have public playtests on the web version of it. And I think there's an old version I put here, but never announced, just for testing how things build. So by developing for web or having that constraint for web, we have this imposition that we can't use things like burst compilation, the job system, none of the kind of stuff. Our restrictions for whatchamacallit, for the GPUs is a bit more tighter. So I still want to have cool effects happen, in the game. But if we're going to do these cool effects, they have to be still quite lean and performant and not require too much native stuff. Yeah. And by the way, for new people who are coming in, I already did a presentation a while ago, but I will be uploading the videos on YouTube, so I'll announce it in the Discord. And the slide deck is also available in the Discord as well, in case you want to view it. But yeah, like this whole application is there's a lot of ways of going about it. And there's different applications both within 2D, like you're seeing here, and extrapolations into 3D. Like here, like you use like techniques like dual contouring to generate 3D surfaces based off of like ISO values and whatnot. Like there's ways of doing that. In this case, we're using marching cubes to generate the surface. But yeah, this is gonna be a whole thing. I'm actually probably gonna have to tackle this off stream either later today or somewhere time else. So I'll probably have a stream where I come back and I say, hey guys, we have something really cool. But yeah, like this is yeah, these are all kind of part of the same general school of algorithms and computation that we have going on here. And honestly, like a lot of what we're doing is just manipulating pixels in a texture and then making it feel like it's organic. Like if you look very closely at some of the dirts here, they're still tied to a grid. We just do a bunch of little tips and tricks to hide and create this illusion that no, this is a fluid thing and you're not actually touching a raster grid. It's actually living and doing all these other things. But fundamentally, every action the player is doing is either adding or subtracting from this texture grid. That's all we're ever doing. Not only the player is manipulating it, but also enemies as well, which I may have screwed myself because there's just no way to get over this little hump, is there? Yeah, there's no way to get over it, ain't it? So we're going to do a little cool cheat code, which is called yoinking the player. I should probably add this to the debug mode where like the player can just float and fly wherever they want to. In just such scenarios. Come on, player, where are you? Where is the there you are. Why are you over there? Yeah, here we go. Look at this. You can see the billboarding happening too. Yeah, all the sprites are billboarded, so you can see how all the trees follow the player. Breaking the illusion. I've never seen that actually. Like I know it does it, but I've never actually watched the trees come alive and kind of stalk the player. That's pretty cool. But yeah, there's entities that like this whole dirt map is kind of this oh, we don't have the fog, do we? Fog helps out a lot with visibility, don't it? Yeah. So there's like this battlegrounds where the player can subtract from it, but enemies can also add to it. So if I have this guy moving towards us, you see how he moves, and he's basically just drawing. Like this enemy is basically just a paintbrush that's drawing on this grid. And you can still see some of the fragments of like effects of pixels. It's very hard to hide this truthfully, but things we do help hide that quite a bit and help them kind of have that coalescing behavior. Ideally, if you want it to be more smoother though, you'd want to have like a lerp between the previous map state and the new map state. But that's neither here nor there. And I think in terms of the return on investment for utility, like if you do a cost-benefit analysis between the cost to implement that and the utility the player gets from it, I don't think it's very great. But yeah. Any other questions about this? Yeah, tri-planar stuff is super helpful. And in fact, even in the, if you look at the slideshow deck, I actually link a paper, or not a paper, but a little article about tri-planar mapping. I didn't look at it. I just actually, I was like, what if I use world positions to do it? But there's more that's involved in it because sometimes you have surfaces, for example, yeah, sometimes you have surfaces that have to have a different texture on the top versus the side. can I please, game, can you show me the, I would really like to see, okay, here we go. So we have materials like this, where I bring them up, they have dirt on the sides, but if you rotate them, you'll see it dynamically change. And if I move it forward, again, you see the same stuff happen. So yeah, there's things like aligning to axis and whatnot and blending that. It's cool how dynamic the dirt is with the enemies. Yeah, there's a lot of back and forth play that I want to have happen and implications of it. And it's going to be very different because usually games you want to fight a boss just so you can beat them in that unlocks area. But if you notice here, the boss is actually, their influence is actually spreading very far. And to unlock certain areas, you actually have to clean that area to unlock it. But the boss is constantly dirtying the environment and undoing the work you're doing. So there's a bit of a difference or recontextualization between the incentive for you engaging with it. And likewise, there's other considerations. Like, for example, some surfaces should, like, for example, if the surface is aligned to the X or the Z axis, we actually don't light it up typically with the dirt. But there's other surfaces where we want to do that because, you know, we want it to feel contiguous, like there's a spill that's happening. So if we go over here, and I don't have my dash ability, sadly, so I can't just zoot past here. You'll notice that even though the surface does become aligned with the X and Y, we disable that so that it can just be one large contiguous BP oil spill. So yeah, a lot of cool technical stuff, or a lot of cool technical stuff in the graphics department for this that I'm not sure how many people are going to notice. I'm glad you guys are here so I can at least get to talk about it. But, oh, I need to fix that too. But yeah, quite a lot. So yeah, depending on interest, I don't know, I might talk about it. I might describe like this whole lighting system we have going on here. But yeah, I was going to show the paper though. Yeah, Triplanar is super duper helpful and useful. And even has like some shader code. I think it's actually tied with Unity as well. Yeah, it's tied to Unity. So they actually have concrete implementations of triplanar mapping, both for object space and for world space. I know I talked about this being aligned to world space, but there's some things here that are triplanar map but are still in object space, which is a pretty cool little thing you could do. We have the best of both worlds with a little bit of complexity added to it. Yeah, super duper cool stuff. Super duper cool stuff. I could talk and yap about it all day, man. But yeah. So that's kind of the general gist of this. I think today I'm probably going to start looking into how to make this feel more fluid, and decide whether or not we want to generate mesh or not, because I still want this to feel like 3D, but I'm not sure. Dynamic mesh retopology, I guess it is technically retopology, but modifying the mesh dynamically is going to be I need to profile it and see what the cost looks like for us to do that. It's really cool, but we must ask ourselves, is this critical? Is this critical to gameplay? But yeah, of course, per vertex lighting, we have both Phong and Gouraud lighting as an option per material, depending on what kind of effect you want to have. So the material, like the terrain's all per vertex lit, whereas other things are done per pixel. There's some weird artifacts like shadow acne that we have here, but for what we're trying to do, I think I kind of like that actually. Anyways, I think this is enough yapping for today, unless there's more questions about certain things in the game, or general stuff. But yeah, man, Messy Mansion, or Stain World as it's slowly becoming known. or not known, but I'm slowly shifting towards calling the game that. Yeah, a lot of cool stuff. So if there's any questions about the slides or this pixel art stuff, always available on Discord as well. As I mentioned at the top of the stream, I'm going to re-upload the lecture we recorded today on YouTube. I'll announce it in the Discord and probably on like the social media platforms. Likewise, the lecture slides are available here on the Discord. So if you want to have access to it, feel free to join and click along and yoink it. I may even extend it. And if there's any questions you guys have in general, feel free to reach out to me personally. Or if you want to have some feedback about your art, feel free to post it in the show your stuff section here. If you want explicitly my feedback, you can add me too. But yeah, guys, I think I'm going to end the stream here. Did a lot of yapping today. Hopefully this stuff is beneficial to you guys in some way, form, or fashion. And yeah, if there's anything else you want me to cover in the future, more in depth and with better aids, because trying to explain this, I would want to have more material available to make describing fragments versus verts and all this stuff more succinct. So if you want a deeper dive that actually is more intelligible to follow along with, let me know and I can dive into it. But yeah, hopefully you guys enjoyed today's little lecture, and I'll catch you guys next time. Till then, bye-bye, and I appreciate the company.